grandfather of Ashoka. He wrote, this is the thing that is equivalent to Machiavelli's The Prince, the Arthra Shastra. It's a guide for the king and his ministers, and I'll pop it all up. Whoops, I went crazy. This is a, so in terms of a guide, it's like how to be a strong ruler. It supports the royal power, meaning it supports that there's a single ruler that can make all of the decisions regarding the empire. He thought the great evil in society was anarchy, and anarchy means what? Without what?
Government?
Without government. So he thought a strong government has to be everywhere in order for there to be peace. And you need a single authority, not a group authority. You need a single figurehead. In this case, it was an emperor. We're not going to read part of his stuff, but I do love how serious he looks at that. Here's his law code, and you saw some from the video. It's written mostly in Sanskrit, but they did write some in Greek and Aramaic, and that means what? It's not just written in Sanskrit, which was his language, but it's also written in Greek, and it's also written in Aramaic, which, by the way, was probably the language that Jesus spoke.
And multiple languages throughout there.
Yeah, so they had trade, and they had influence from afar, and they spread their ideas beyond their borders. Cosmopolitan, which is way better than a drink that you might know, which tastes like crap, by the way. Cosmopolitan means of the world. So not just like Indian thought, but worldly thought. They're a very diverse empire. Buddhist principles dominated his laws, which seem odd that a law comes from Buddhist principles, which are essentially nonviolence, individual path to salvation, but you're going to impose Buddhist principles on your nation, meaning you're going to say, all right, people, we're all going to be nonviolent. We're not all individually going to choose nonviolence. We're all going to be nonviolent. Morality, religious toleration. He's pretty awesome for that.
So what would they do then if they're like saying that they're not violent and get their people? What if someone be violent? They can't really fight back.
No, but they did because it's a government. The government's full of hypocrisy. They just didn't go on any major, 9,000 elephant war campaigns to take people over anymore.
So it's like a defending violence. There's like a defending violence, like.
They will defend themselves. But if you're an empire and you really do have a nonviolent principle, you are, remember when he dies and they said it was chaotic because so many people were trying to achieve power. If you are a ruler and your philosophy is nonviolence, it only exists while you exist and can impose it. Pillars on the left, you're gonna see, you're gonna do a lot of pillars, aren't you? So this is just a map that kind of shows his vast empire, and then it happens to also mention rock edicts, so I'm going to point them out. These triangles, triangle, 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 these are stones that are engraved with laws and professing his greatness. You saw one on the video where it said there was this vast war, and the ruler Ashoka was sorry for it. That's the kind of stuff that are on the edicts. And then there are also pillar edicts, and they are the circles. Circle, 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 circle. And I equate them to obelisks, but they're pillars. And they have laws written on them. They tell us a lot about his authority and what he stood for. Didn't mean to do that. Meant to. This right-hand side is women under an Ashoka tree. And what does that tell me about women during his time period? Let's think. Remember the Ramayana and Sita? Is it going to be an egalitarian society and women are equal to men? No, it's very patriarchal. Child marriage was common. I hate to even mention these people, but 8-year-old girls, as young as 8-year-olds, were married to men in their 20s. Women were not encouraged to be involved in public or civic life. They were encouraged to remain in the home. They call that the private sphere. One of the stones or pillars, I don't know which, talks about a woman's place being in the private sphere, meaning the home and not public life. And that was her dharma to fulfill.
Why didn't they want to marry older women, or their age?
What shall I say? Because as soon as you can get a female out of your household, then she's no longer in your care. She's in her husband's care, and they have to support her. They have to feed her. This happened in China as well. I don't think it's awesome. By the way, modern day, 2014, Yemen, girls as young as 8 are married.
Do they have babies then?
Modern?
Or like,
No, they can't have babies yet because they haven't passed through puberty.
oh yeah, no. But
Do
like,
you say modern day?
Modern day 2014, they're actually trying to get a law passed in Yemen to say that girls cannot be married off before like 14.
And a lot of those girls that end up getting pregnant end up dying in childbirth because their body just isn't ready.
Yeah, so say they get pregnant, say they go through puberty at 12 or 13 and they're tiny. Well, their pelvis is also tiny, and they don't get prenatal care, and they don't get help with birth, and they do end up often dying in childbirth. It's a much higher rate. Part of the reason that the women do not have a good role is both the Mahabharata and the Ramayana portrayed women as weak-willed, overly emotional. They basically blamed Sita's situation on her, right? Not on the god who stole her away, but on her. We'll do a lot more Buddhism later, but I should do a quick, hey, the person who starts Buddhism, his name is Siddhartha Gautama. He was actually a prince, and there was some kind of prophecy that if he left his house, his family would fall into ruin. But guess what? He leaves his house, and his family doesn't fall into ruin, but he does, found a whole religion of Buddhism. Because he goes out in the world, and he discovers suffering, he sees it. 3 bad things he sees, and I can't remember right now the story. But he goes and he sits under a Bodhi tree, which is spelled B-O-D-I. This is part of his legend. And he starts meditating. He spends 49 days underneath this tree, by the way. And at the end of 49 days, he discovers that the cause of all bad things in the world is suffering, and that we're all destined to suffer, but you have to figure out how to deal with this suffering. And then he attained the title Buddha. And Buddha means enlightened one or teacher. And he begins teaching his doctrine, and his followers only had the robes that they wore, and they had their bowls for their food, and they wandered around, and they begged, and they meditated, and they were nonviolent, and they formed monastic communities. And you saw a monastery in the video. These are people that are devoted to Buddha. He, by the way, is not a god. He does not want to be worshipped as a god. He just wants people to do things like he did. These are the stupas. Oh. Stupa is a mound-like structure. This is a stupa. And it shows Ashoka's support of Buddhism because he built these all over the place. Why does he convert to Buddhism? What happened in his life that he was like, oh, this is devastating, I can't handle it?
Is he sleeping?
Yes. Wake up, people.
Like during after the war.
Yes.
And he
What is
had
the
a
battle?
Pyrrhic victory
Oh,
after that.
well,
Kalinga, very good. It is a Pyrrhic victory. It's not worth all the devastation. So, as a result of this, he bans animal sacrifices, which is good for animals. mandated that all people that were in his court were vegetarians. And this is a little bit of irony, but Hindus, the majority of India is still vegetarian because most Hindu people are vegetarian. Because they don't believe in harming creatures. You know, if you eat chickens, it might be your relatives that had come back as chickens. Cool picture. Cool picture. Cool picture. Buddha. And I think that's it. Oh, I need turmoil and power back. So he dies. And an economic crisis, of course, follows it because he is no longer there to impose his nonviolence. Part of it is, it was really expensive for him to maintain the bureaucracy that kept his empire. The military was not supported by the tax revenue, and if you have a military that is not being paid, what does the military do? They turn against the government that is not paying them. So they began to abandon the Mauryan Empire, basically. As a result, though, and it disappeared by 185 BCE, his empire was then city-states, independent provinces. He had a lot of influence on the time period in India, meaning he had trade routes that were like over 1,000 miles long. He had peace for a long period of time. He left them with some good advances. Remember the road thing from the video where he had built the road network throughout India, which was okay, but then the city-states basically were warring against each other for a while. You can almost call it the warring states period. And this is BCE. 220 BCE to 320 CE, turmoil, power vacuum, independent city-states that we're not going to talk about. Except we are going to talk later about Gupta and, are we going to do, is it Surya? Sangha. Sangha. So, pause on Mauryan Empire, and then we're going to do Mauryan architecture, art,